Hello, welcome. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're located. My name is Lori Pilchik. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer with NovoEd, and I'm glad to be here with you today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us for today's webinar, Building a Coaching Culture Across Your Organization. We're thrilled by the interest in this topic, which is indicative of its importance to the health and performance of your organizations. We really appreciate you joining us for this important conversation. Now on to some housekeeping slides. I wanted to take a moment to give you a brief overview of GoToWebinar. Although I was thinking to myself, at this point, most of us are quite likely very familiar with GoToWebinar, but just in case, a few key pointers here. Please note, one, that you are all on mute, but you can use your control panel as shown here to submit any questions or comments at any point during today's webinar. And we will respond to those questions either as they come in or at appropriate breakpoints during the webinar. At the end of the webinar, an exit survey will pop up. We do encourage you to please fill out the survey. It'll only take a moment, but it does help inform our webinar, future webinar topics, and our overall webinar strategy. So thank you in advance for that. Lastly, I do want to mention that this webinar is being recorded, and you will receive the recording via email tomorrow morning. Okay, on to the agenda. So we are in the middle of introductions and overview right now. When I am done with the segment, I will transition to Wendy Hanson, who will take on really the substance of today's topic on coaching. She and Andrew will then actually do a fun exercise for and with you. It will be a demo of live coaching, and I think we'll have some fun with that. And then finally, Andrew will lead us through how technology can enable organizations to develop coaching skills at scale. And now, if you will just allow me to do a brief commercial break here, essentially from your host and sponsor of today's webinar. That's us, that's NovoEd. NovoEd's collaborative learning platform enables organizations to design and deliver experiential learning that accelerates business performance on a global scale. Since our founding at Stanford's Social Algorithm Laboratory back in 2012, global organizations, executive education providers, and training firms have relied on NovoEd to develop high-value capabilities through purposeful practice and application, coaching and mentorship, and group collaboration. Our approach to learning connects diverse groups of learners, mentors, and leaders in a high-impact online learning environment, which has driven measurable outcomes for companies like the ones you see here listed on this slide. Before I transition into the individual introductions, I'd first like to introduce you to the NovoEd and Better Manager partnership and why we are here together today. NovoEd and Better Manager have teamed up to provide a powerful technology-enabled coaching program for managers, utilizing Better Manager's leading-edge training content and expert coach facilitators, along with NovoEd's award-winning social learning platform. This program that we've put together is a comprehensive solution designed to develop and strengthen the coaching skills of managers at scale. Today's webinar is an opportunity for our speakers, Wendy and Andrew, to share their respective expertise with you on leveraging technology to coach at scale and to build an organization-wide coaching culture. So thank you. So let me introduce Wendy and Andrew, who have now appeared on video here. Thanks to both of you for joining us today, and we look forward to hearing from each of you. So Wendy Hanson is the co-founder and COO of Better Manager, whose mission it is to help leaders at all levels create a workplace where people can thrive. Wendy and the Better Manager team have coached thousands of managers across hundreds of companies around the globe. Wendy has more than 20 years of management, executive coaching, and education experience. In those years, she was an executive coach with Google for 8 years and has also worked with numerous startups and other innovative businesses. Thank you so much, Wendy, for your partnership and for joining us today.
Thank you.
Wendy is joined by Andrew Linford of NovoEd. Andrew is the Director of Operations at NovoEd and one of NovoEd's leading learning experience design experts. Andrew has worked as an instructional design consultant for many of NovoEd's large enterprise customers, and also co-design NovoEd's very popular learning experience design course. Andrew has worked closely with Wendy and the Better Manager team in co-developing the NovoEd Better Manager course, Coaching Skills for Managers. So thank you, Andrew, for joining us today. Okay, so now to warm us up for today's topic, we're asking you to participate in 2 quick polls to kind of gauge where the audience is and to help inform our discussion today. So first poll here, which you should see on your screen: what percentage of managers in your organizations have access to a leadership development program? If you're not in an organization, you might work for a training firm or otherwise, maybe you can make an estimate of those organizations with which you work or partner. So if you could just take a moment or so. Great, thank you. Interesting. We'll share the results shortly, of course. Just waiting for, we've got about 3/4 of you voting. Would love to see a few more before we close the poll. Okay, why don't we give it another 10 seconds or so. All right. Okay, why don't we close the poll and see what we have here. I'm actually a little surprised. I'll be curious to hear what Wendy has to say, but I would love to know about those organizations in which there's 75 to 100% of managers having access to a leadership development program. And actually, by the way, the chat can be used not just for questions, but if you do have any comments or any color on these numbers, that would be great for me and for Wendy and Andrew to see, because from my perspective, and again, I look forward to hearing from Wendy, I'm actually encouraged by these numbers in which many organizations have, 50% have 50% or more participating. Okay, let's close this poll and move to the next poll. Okay, the next poll is, to what extent do your leadership development programs include a coaching component? So as you can see here, to a large extent, moderate, slightly, or not at all. So thanks for the active participation here. Okay. This will be good fodder for today's topic. Okay, we'll just give it again about 10 more seconds. We're closing in at about 3/4 of the folks voting, and we'll just give that another moment or so. Okay, perfect. Let's close the poll and take a look here. So again, we saw that quite a few of you did have leadership development programs, so making this actually even more helpful or instructive. 14% don't have any sort of coaching or slightly. So maybe close to 50% slightly or not at all, and then moderate. So I think that's probably why you're all here today, to learn a little bit more about how to incorporate coaching in your leadership development programs and how to build and develop a coaching culture. So with that said, thanks for playing, and let me turn it over to Wendy.
Thank you very much. It is great to be here, everyone. Thank you, and very interesting poll numbers. If I round it up a little bit, about 50% have active leadership programs, and about 50% have coaching, which I was very impressed with, because I think that what we're going to talk about today, I love that it's for half of you, it might be some new news about what coaching can do when your managers learn how to coach, and for others it will be, wow, we're all on the right track. And please, as Lori said, put anything in the chat there, things that we can share with people. That would be wonderful. So let's look at a little statistics here, because data is always a good thing. The Gallup organization said 39% of newer managers are receiving leadership training, and only 31% are receiving coaching. Well, new managers, we always laugh because we think they get thrown in the deep end of the pool. If you go from an individual contributor to a manager, it's a totally different skill set. And oftentimes we're not providing enough support and supervision. And because it's a different role, working through somebody rather than doing the work yourself. And we'll talk more about that concept when we talk about coaching. And then only 10% of mid-level managers feel well equipped to handle complex issues. Well, we're in the time of the pandemic, and being a manager before wasn't even easy. And now we're sustaining remote management. And so the humans come to work every day or work from home every day with different issues and different problems. And so that middle management group, many companies we've worked with call it the big middle because it's the biggest group that they have. Besides, they have senior execs or they have new, they have people that are individual contributors. And all these managers are really making business flow, and they don't really feel well equipped. That's an interesting stat. And only 13% of executives say that they do an excellent job of developing their people. Wow, I've worked with many senior leaders who are so competent, but at times there's a lot of skills you have to, if you're an exec, you've got a lot of skills on the table there. You have to look at the vision of the company, moving that ahead, and you also have to be a connector with all your people. So there are things that they don't feel as competent at. And what happens is, I've seen this for 20 years. They called me a coaching veteran. I hope that's not a bad thing that that long in this profession. But whatever happens at the top of the organization, it's usually a mirror image to how the organization is. So the fact that 13% of the executives don't feel so good about how they're leading in terms of developing others is a bit problematic. Yeah. So as Lori mentioned, where we have a bit of a Google base at Better Manager. Our CEO, Stefan Panier, was in Google in 2002 and was one of those early people. I think around 500 people were at Google at that time. Then I'm one of the other co-founders, along with Will Corley. We were brought on there by the sales organization to coach back in that time too, around 2002, and working with sales teams all over the country. And this was a small group because it was the sales organization. But Google as a whole were really, Larry and Sergey, the founders, were engineers. And they really didn't think there needed to be that many managers. Why should we have so many managers? We really, if you can code, you got it. And at that time, Google saw itself truly as a, engineering organization. So they did what they do best, and they looked at the data. So they did a survey and a study, and that was called Google Project Oxygen. So this was going up to 2008. Meanwhile, Stefan was there, Will and I were coaching people, but Google wanted to find out what really did they want from managers? Because engineers, their belief was that the number one attribute would be technical ability and knowledge. And surprise, the key finding was the number one behavior of a good manager is being a good coach. And so many of the things that came out of that Google Oxygen study is what we have used at Better Manager to build our coaching and training programs, because they're very pragmatic, how to have one-on-one, how to give feedback. But being a good coach was really the most important thing that somebody needed to do to be seen as a manager. So I think that really changed the way Google looked at management back in the day. Now, let's learn more about, for those that haven't been exposed to coaching. For 50% of you who have, you know these things probably, but I'll just reinforce them. But for some of you, if you've not been exposed, the tenets of good coaching: asking questions and curiosity. A coach comes at things in a very different way because we come at things to be being curious. And this is something that managers, rather than come in, and we've laughed about this, asking why questions. If I asked Andrew, why did you do that, Andrew? Even if I watched my tone of voice, Andrew would think, oh, she's not that happy with yeah, it sounds a little judgmental. But if I come at things and say, I'm curious, how did you reach this conclusion? Help walk me through it. It's a very different way that a manager can work with people and be coaching them and asking questions. And you're actually going to see a live demo, as Lori shared. Andrew is going to do a quick, like 7-minute coaching demo. So you're going to be listening for questions, because questions are what get people to think. As a coach, when I ask someone a question, what do you think the impact will be of that decision that you've made? And they stop in their tracks and they're silent. that means it was a really good question that they had not thought of before. And we need to help people come up with some of their own answers. Listening. We do a lot of work as professional coaches on listening, and I think it's one of the skills that managers need the most. I don't know if any of you have noticed sitting on Zoom conversations lately that some people are sitting there and they're doing other work, or they're not listening, by the way, when you call on them and they say, oh, we're not doing a really good job of focus and listening. When we teach managers about listening as part of any kind of coaching course, they often say, this is actually going to make my personal life better too, my relationships at home with my spouse or my partner, because we do not listen well, but we don't know what that is. So in this class, we go around what listening is, what are the differences, and the ahas that come out of that have been tremendous. The third big piece of coaching, and this is as we develop a coaching culture in a company, we have to be able to give feedback to each other. We have to know that feedback, both to help somebody grow, to say, gosh, that was a great job. And feedback really needs to be not the traditional, like, wow, that was a great job. If you say that, it really doesn't, I don't know what you liked about that job. When you ask those questions in that way, you were able to blah, 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 make that happen. And then I say, now I get that. So I can take in the feedback. When we give feedback, it needs to be specific. So we're asking questions, we're curious, we're listening on different levels, we give feedback. And then the last piece of really what makes good coaching is accountability and accomplishments. Accountability, I've seen a lot of problems in this. People tend to delegate by taking something, let's take this, and throwing it over the fence without having any, like, when am I going to check back? I've seen this happen, and I am done it myself. That then I'm not clear. Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Andrew's done it too. You think the person gets what you're saying. They're not quite getting what you're saying. They put a lot of work into it. They come back and they say, look at this. And it was in the wrong direction. So accountability is like, let's not micromanage. That's a big problem that we're having right now in remote environments, but let's make sure that we can, here's the path that we should go on. Let's look at the GPS together. Let's set our GPS of where we're heading, but let's have a pit stop at this gas station first to make sure you're on the right road, and then go and be supportive. And that's what accountability is. So are you going to do this? Wow, great. When can we check in? So that's a big part of a skill that managers need to really learn how to do well. And then accomplishments, I gotta say, this is kind of one of my favorites. Yeah, Andrew is going to get me off that, and it's one of my favorite ones. Accomplishments is that we really have to celebrate our wins, and it does something to the chemicals in our body when we get oxytocin and dopamine. When a team gives each other, even if it's virtual, high fives, like Andrew and I, we need a high five after we've been working on this program together. And everybody, there's a success, it gives you a shot of dopamine in your body, which really you feel invigorated, you have energy. And oxytocin is really about safety. Like, I feel safe. I feel like I'm in a safe place with these people. So if we celebrate wins and say, Andrew, you've just been a pleasure to work with because you always respond when I'm writing you emails. I get clear. We figure out how to solve problems. Thank you. I appreciate your partnership. That feels so much better. And he knows what I appreciated about him. And Andrew gets a shot of dopamine. And we have to make sure that we do that. Oftentimes we think we're giving people a job. No, if we're really going to do our job well, we're going to help people deal with come from their strengths, really work together and celebrate the wins. And once in a while, surprise people. I have heard some amazing stories during this pandemic of things that companies have done in terms of looking at a coaching culture. How do I make people feel included? Companies sending care packages to people's doors, because usually there might be a table in the office with swag on it, or making sure that people feel like they're being heard and doing some other things. It's all part of the accountability, accomplishments, gratitude, appreciation, and making people feel connected. So we looked at what happens in coaching. Let's look at what maybe some of those misconceptions out there about coaching. So coaching is best done by external coaches. Well, that's a yes and. It's good if a company can have some external coaches, but our managers need to learn coaching skills. So that is a misconception. Oftentimes it's helpful to have that outside third party who doesn't know about your business or the cast of characters. So when they're coaching you, you have a safe space to speak about things. But if we have a coaching culture, we all know how to support each other. And we all know, oh, Andrew, you got a project right now. What if we're going to set the GPS, what does that look like? Where are you heading toward? Wow, that's great. How can I support you? What do you need? We really have those conversations. When I think of an external coach, I think you get coaching every few weeks. You have something, you set some goals, and you move on. When you have internal coaches, it's not about like we have to go sit down in the office every time, which we don't have offices anymore like that, but we talk on the fly. And it's still a coaching conversation because we're still learning and growing and we're figuring out how to listen, ask questions, and move the action ahead. The next is coaching is just for high potential employees. Well, that's not true either. Everybody needs a coach. I believe everybody could lead from whatever seat they are on the bus, because we all need to be leaders wherever we are. And even as an individual contributor, how do I make a difference? And it's not just about going up in the organization. Now we know career development is more like a climbing wall than a ladder. So we need to make sure that we're not only focusing on our high potential people, but we're providing coaching from a manager standpoint and possibly some external for everybody in an organization. And I think coaching now has become more scalable, so we're able to do that. The last one is coaches need to be experts in subject matter content. Well, that is a very big misnomer. And I can speak for myself. I have coached hundreds of, probably more, like almost 1,000 engineers over the last 20 years. I am not an engineer. I don't really have the good logical engineering brain. I have different strengths. But when I have coached engineers, I've been able to help them to stand back because I'm not a subject matter expert. And I get off the phone and it's like, wow, they solved this problem in a miraculous way. I was working with one engineer who was so smart and really knew what he was doing, led a lot of teams, but he was unable to stand up in front of a group to be able to share his ideas because his thinking was so deep on the subject. But I was able to coach him. What do you want people to walk away with? How do you want them to feel when they leave this lunch and learn presentation? What's the actions they need to take to be able to break it down? Because sometimes we actually know too much about a subject. So if a manager can take that stand back place or an external coach take that stand back place, it really is helpful. You do not need to be an expert. If you're an expert, it really means you're a consultant and you're going to throw in your knowledge rather than coaching and helping someone find their answer. And maybe, you're brainstorming together. At Better Manager, we have coaching we call directed coaching because we have a lot of experienced business people. And sometimes we'll brainstorm together and say, may I share an idea with you? And that's how things move along. But you definitely don't need to be an expert.
Hey, Wendy, before you move on, Andrew, if you could come back, because this is Lori, and I just received, do you go back? Thanks. One misconception or potential misconception that I'm hearing from our audience is that coaching is the same as mentoring. And so this person wants to know, is there a difference? What is the difference between coaching and mentoring? And assuming this person thinks that there is and wants to know, how do you shift mindsets in your organizations to help people understand the difference?
Great. Yes. There are actually, I'm going to throw in 4 things. There's coaching, there's mentoring, there's consulting, and there's therapy. Those are things that sometimes get wiggled all together. The difference between coaching and mentoring is if you are a mentor, you are really helping somebody grow in a certain area. It's wonderful if you have a mentor inside your organization who's going to say, when I came up the ladder, here's the things that I was working on. And you're really providing some guidance, like a lighthouse, to be able to help people maybe look at what are other positions that they could grow towards in the future. they're not really going to use coaching skills. They're going to use their individual expertise to help you to learn what might be your next shot. What might you be doing next? Whereas manager as a coach is talking about projects, is coaching you about, right now we have terrible problems with how do we set up our schedule during the day during this time of the pandemic. Some people are having to work late at night because they have kids and they're doing homeschooling. And a manager might be coaching around, what is your best time of day to be working? So that's a very different thing than mentoring. So I hope that helps. Great.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to, well, actually, go ahead with this one. Well, let me actually give you some questions because I think maybe you address them with this answer. So there's a few questions I'm going to combine here, and they are around, is coaching largely about asking the right questions or inspiring? And then the other person said, is coaching, some people think that coaching is telling people what they would do or giving them advice. That doesn't appear to be what you're saying. So how do you change the mindset?
Great. My thought is that we are actually a big society of teleholics. We want to tell people what to do. And if you're a manager and you know how to do certain things, it's so much easier just to tell somebody. So it's really being able to open up a dialogue. And in traditional coaching, it's about the person's agenda. Like, you hold that person's agenda. It's not your agenda. When you're a manager using coaching skills, it's a little different because you are both trying to learn. The thing about inspiring in coaching, a coach might be very inspiring because this coach actually sees you and they hear you, and when we feel heard, it's inspiring. And it's really more that connection and that trust and that listening. And whether that's an outside coach or your manager, and hopefully it's your manager, that you feel that you have a safe space there. So I think there's a big distinction there. And certainly mentoring and coaching in an organization, that there are many organizations that have mentor pieces that people can sign up if they're looking for a mentor. I've worked with a number of companies like that, or it's an informal network. And coaching, if we want this culture, we want to have all of these things together. Anything else, Lori? Okay.
There's an interesting question here, but I'm going to have you move on a little bit. It's about culture, but I know that you have a slide coming up, so I'll ask it in that context. But it's a goodie, so just you all wait. Okay.
Okay. Wow. Suspense. Yes, a really good one. Okay. So what does a coaching culture look like in an organization? So we've talked about giving feedback. We've talked about listening. Safe spaces, people working together, supporting each other, and not just like you don't do it every 2 weeks. It's just part of the culture. It's who we are. It's checking in with people. And what does it do? It creates high employee engagement. Right now, it's a challenging time, and if we can help people to feel safe, we can't answer questions. There was an analogy that I was doing a webinar with Dr. George Woods about remote management and the problems. And our brains are really wired to take what we have learned and then say, oh, based on what I have learned, here's what I'm going to do going forward. Well, in this pandemic, we've never had this situation before. So many managers and leaders are going to be asked questions that they don't know the answer to. And to get high employee engagement is to have trust. And if you don't know, say, we don't know that right now, but we're working that out. What ideas might you have? I think that coaching culture is that open conversation and not being the one that knows everything. Because right now we're all in kind of beginner's mind. What is our business world going to look like in 6 months or 12 months? Where some companies are making it all up all over again. I'm fortunate that Better Manager as a company got started virtual and remote, so we didn't have to change anything. But there are companies that are really, developing, as schools are, hybrid models. So you want to have that engagement so people feel safe. A sense of empowerment to excel at tasks. that when people feel empowered, and coaching can do that, rather than if you micromanage, you take the wind out of everybody. If you can coach them and work together, then they know if they make a mistake, it's a mistake. Nobody gets hurt, you know. We always use the expression in our ops organization, we're not saving babies at this point. So if something goes wrong, everything's going to be okay. Also, in a coaching culture, creativity is rewarded. And creativity is a lot about taking risks that we have to be able to in order to move forward. And especially during this time, there are things that we're going to do that we've never done before, and ways to show up. I've heard such fantastic stories of organizations that are bringing everybody together, and the CEO is on Zoom with a 2-year-old on his lap to show this is what happens right now, you know, and it's okay. So as an organization, we have to be creative, we have to take risks, we have to do things that maybe we didn't do before, to keep everybody connected. And as we talked about, people are open to feedback. I worked with someone in the restaurant industry a number of years ago, and they were so anxious for feedback that they were like, oh my God, my quarterly review is here so that I can talk to my manager and the owner about what kind of feedback I can get to grow. And they took on a piece, the concept of Kaizen. We got to get 1% better every day. And this was a 5-star restaurant. So there were a lot of very specific things. But that feedback and people wanting it, not like, oh, somebody's going to give me feedback. That's part of a coaching culture. And employees take pride in their responsibilities, like being proud of the mission of your organization, that we're really out making a difference, you know, that we're changing people's lives because of the work we do. That's really important. And certainly Andrew and I know that, being in kind of the professional development leadership field, that really makes a difference to people. And we want employees to feel safe. Psychological safety has come up as a big issue in the folks that we've been coaching lately. And people need to feel that they really can feel safe, that they're if something is going wrong, somebody's got their back. They have teammates that have their back. And that's what happens in this organization. Nobody's put out to the side. Everybody's supported each other.
Okay, so Wendy, I want to bring this question up now, and then I think we'll need, given timing, we'll need to start moving into the demo. But there's some great questions, so thank you to the audience for your participation. If I'm representing this person well, I think what they're asking is that a lot of times coaching is happening one-on-one, and if you're trying to build out a coaching culture, how do you bring that culture into your teams? How are you coaching as a group? So how do you expand it really from one-on-one to maybe team meetings or groups?
That's a great question. Yes. We've broken down at Better Manager. There are 4 major pillars as a manager. You have to look at yourself, your team member, which is kind of the one-on-one, your team, and the organization. So what I would say in this case is that, yes, you might have one-on-one conversations, but when you bring your team together, you can do a lot of the same things. One exercise that I've told managers so many times, and they've done it, and it's had great results, is the appreciation exercise. That you might take 2 or 3 people in your team meeting every week, and people say, so let's talk. What do we appreciate about Andrew? And specifically give him feedback about who he is as a person, what he brings. And that becomes something that people look forward to, whether you do that once a month at a meeting, whether you do one person at a time, you know, checking in with people. Like coaching is checking in, how are you feeling now and what are you going to do? So at team meetings, you're able to do that too. And sometimes right now, I've worked with some managers that say, because we're under so much stress, this was a sales manager who actually moved his first meeting of the week till Monday morning and made sure it was humorous. And everybody had to bring a funny story of what had happened to them over the weekend. And there was no shortage of funny stories. And so it really got people to break the ice. So there are ways that team activities are really important. And we do these naturally in coaching, checking in with people. You know, how are you all feeling on a scale of 1 to 10 today? Whenever I do a group teamwork, I always ask that question, because then when you have some ones and twos in the room, you know, you got to check in on them and make sure they're okay. So I think you can build those in. So that was a great question.
Okay, great.
So this is just something that I've always been curious about, because artists and athletes and musicians have always had coaches, and we don't think twice about it. Who would think of a baseball team? And I don't know that much about baseball, but you have hitting coaches and you have pitching coaches. And that's just the way for sports aficionados. They know that. You always have a coach, because a coach helps you raise your game. You know, you wouldn't, if you were playing the violin, you would have a coach that was really working with you in the orchestra to help raise your game. And now it's about time that we look at that same kind of raise your game, that we need that in business. That's why coaches are so important there. So, my friend Andrew.
Hi.
Thank you so much for doing this with me today, because I really think it gives.
Oh, excuse me, but I think there's a bit of a reverb or an echo on Andrew's end.
It should be all fine. Is it not? Okay, let me switch to this just a second.
Thanks for your patience, everybody.
Yes. So one of the things I'm going to ask Andrew. No sound yet, Andrew.
How about now?
Perfect. So we're just going to do a quick demo, but I want you to listen for some of the coaching techniques or styles that I'm using when I talk with Andrew, and know that it's probably going to be 5 to 7 minutes, and you know, but it's kind of what happens coaching on the fly. It's what I talked about, that in a coaching culture, this is what you do. So I want you to listen for those things, because I'm going to ask you afterwards. So Andrew, what is one leadership challenge that you're experiencing during this pandemic?
I think one big challenge is really, I guess, sort of what you were talking about, but connecting with people. Sort of in the office, you have those water cooler conversations. You're able to sort of informally connect with people. My favorite thing was always taking people out for a boba. I guess that's a San Francisco thing to do, but
would you say what a boba is?
Bubble tea from Taiwan, but something a little bit different, you know, sort of the idea of it's not just a coffee, it's something slightly different. It enables different conversations to start, whether it's more, hey, why did you join NovoEd, to where do you want to go at NovoEd, other things like that. It's a lot easier to do in that informal context versus sort of the formal context that Zoom presents.
Yeah. So being able to kind of warm up a relationship by being in person and just meeting people around the office, that's something that's missing right now.
Yeah, and I guess it's a little bit people outside your team, but even people inside your team, especially if you're hiring someone only remotely and you never actually get to meet them. There's definitely a little bit of a different feeling.
What feedback have you gotten from people that are joining the company? That I think you've had people joining now during this pandemic that don't get to meet all their colleagues. What kind of feedback do you get from them?
I mean, I think one item of feedback is people often say, yeah, you know, I'm able to meet a couple of people on my immediate team, but it sort of feels isolated in the sense of maybe you meet with me because I'm helping out with certain parts of your onboarding, you meet with your manager, you meet with a couple of your peers and your colleagues, but you're not going to sort of get a sense of the organization as a whole. You're just getting a sense of a couple of different people.
And when you're meeting with people now online, what do you want them to get out of that? You know, the best that they could. It's not the optimum that we would like to have, but how would you like them to feel after meeting with you?
I hadn't thought about that question. I guess there's a few different, well, it depends on the purpose of what the meeting is, and maybe that's a challenge as well, because if I'm having a meeting that's on a specific onboarding topic, there's a certain objective I have behind that, and in that, maybe, yeah, I do some informal, hey, how are you doing? Sort of, how's your first week been? Something of that nature, but that's very different than sort of a different big picture. Hey, what are you really hoping to learn and grow in at this job?
Yeah. And so you really want to, it sounds like you want to inspire them to, I'm so glad I came to this company. You know,
Yeah,
Andrew is asking me about where I want to go, what I want to be. Wow.
yeah.
So I have an opportunity to think outside the box a little bit and think that somebody truly cares about me.
Yeah, I think that's probably really the key point is sort of the manager, everyone expects that the manager is going to care, and I'm sure my direct reports think the same thing. But if it's sort of, you can show that type of compassion and curiosity from other parts of the organization, I think that's always really beneficial.
Yeah. May I make a suggestion of something that I learned from another manager of what they did at their company?
Absolutely.
Um, you know that because you're at a distance and you can't be with them. Normally, I worked with one company who the sales manager decided everybody that he brought in, he was going to put like flowers or a balloon on their desk when they were new so that people will know. So we can't do that. But what if you could send somebody something? Like you send them a that like the care packages that I talked
Yeah.
about. Like here's some of the swag from the organization, so you get the Novo Ed T-shirt that you can wear or
Mhm.
whatever that is, and then do not open until you meet with Andrew. How do you think that would make them feel?
Well, we'd have to see how many people actually follow those instructions, but I think it's interesting because we do a small care package now, but it's sort of disconnected from the interpersonal thing. And I think that's a really interesting idea and concept is how might you tie that more in with the interpersonal thing, not just we care about you, here's a care package, but we care about you, let's talk to you while you have your care package.
Yeah, yeah. So, what is one thing that you would be able to do that you might do differently? I love beta
Yeah,
testing, and I know you do too as an
yeah.
organization, right? We beta test everything. So, what's one way of onboarding somebody that you might beta test in the next 2 weeks?
I think so. Like, I guess the whole thing is with my boba chats being gone. I haven't had the chance to ask those types of questions of new employees. So figuring out some way to intentionally set aside the time. Someone can make their own tea or coffee, but intentionally set the time saying, hey, this is not about onboarding. There's no sort of work objective here beyond just getting to know you better as a person,
Yeah,
and sort of calling that out.
great, great. And can we check back with each other in a couple of weeks after you've brought somebody else on and had that
I
conversation?
appreciate the accountability there.
All right. Yeah, well, not letting you off the hook. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, what I loved about how you looked at this, Andrew, is that it was about caring for people, and that's why you go on the bubble chats and you have the bubble tea together because
Yeah.
you want to show them and get to know them as people. And I can feel that in terms of you don't want it just to be business. You want that relationship to get built.
Yeah.
And I think that's an extraordinary part of onboarding because they always say your first day on the job and your last day on the job are really the most important, the ones you're going to remember. The ones in between we don't remember as much, but we always remember that first and that last, so you have an opportunity.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank
Wendy.
you
Really
for that,
appreciate it.
Wendy, and thank you, Andrew. I'd love to do a little more debriefing on this, but in the interest of time, why don't we move on to this last segment? And as a reminder to our participants today, we're now going to both talk about and show how you might consider using technology to help you scale this idea of coaching. So, and then we'll still have some time at the end to address any final questions. So thanks, Andrew.
Thank you. And I hope some of you are responding to that on the chat. I know Wendy asked lots of really great questions. Sort of thinking about sort of how those questions were done, how you might implement some of those own questions. Like, feel free to send those out. Hopefully we'll get some good questions at the end, and Lori will be able to highlight some of those responses. So highly encourage you to participate there. But I'm going to move over into the topic of, we've talked about coaching itself. Next, let's actually take a little bit more of a look of how you scale it, right? So yeah, all of these skills are great. Wendy talked about all the great beneficial things that come out of having a good culture of coaching, but how do you really train people to effectively be good coaches? There are a few things that I want to highlight in terms of how you think about scaling it across an organization. Part one is there's always content about coaching. Content in and of itself can be great, but doesn't always impact change. To impact change, you need a little bit more on top of the content that's being provided, whether it's videos or readings. You need a little bit more of a social element, so some discussion and feedback, even just getting two people together to talk about coaching, talk about how they implemented listening, talk about how they implemented feedback. That's already going to provide a little bit more reinforcement to what people are working on. Now, of course, beyond that, it's not just learning about it or talking with people about it, it's actually applying it, putting it into action, testing it out, beta testing as Wendy and I were talking about, but really thinking deeply about, okay, I'm learning about this, I'm talking about this, now let me apply it. And then the final thing about really being able to scale something training-wise at an organization is you need the organization support and understanding of what's happening. So being able to help facilitate, being able to provide those nudges, getting a little bit of an understanding of how well are different participants learning the coaching, how well is this being implemented. So what I'm going to do actually is I am going to hop over into the course that NovoEd and Better Manager have developed together. And I realize this just froze, so let me reload the page. But this is a new, sorry, just a moment here. New feature release there. So this is a course that we've worked on together to bring the best of what Better Manager does in terms of their content it has on coaching, the executive coaches that they already provide, but enabling with the NovoEd platform to scale this coaching much more effectively. So let me actually just hop into this page here, for example, 3 levels of listening. As you heard Wendy talk about, listening is one of those core components of being a good coach. You'll see some of the content here, right? Looking at some of the different components of what are the different levels of listening, a video, some reading. So this is step 1, right? Being able to provide people the information, the tools they need to think through it. That's great, but moving into step 2, how can you promote a little bit more of a conversation about it? Really get people to start thinking more deeply about it, engage in the different topics. So here you can actually see some discussion responses people have had about different levels of listening, when they do different levels of listening, people responding back and forth. That type of conversation does a really great job reinforcing it and talking about a coaching culture at an organization as a whole. You get a lot more sort of a cross-organization implementation of that. The final point, which I was talking about in terms of actually going from content to discussion, is the actual application. And so here's an example of actually having people reflect on what they've learned, but really in the accountability part that Wendy was talking about, what behaviors are you going to start, stop, and continue? Then checking back in with people afterwards. People making sure that the organization and the people in this course are applying and really learning via their own experiences how to do a better job coaching. For the final part, in terms of the facilitation and management, I will hop right back over here and highlight there are a lot of different ways to really encourage this. Different things like having executive buy-in, making sure that's visible, being able to send reminders to people about, hey, catch up on some content, here you need to follow up on this discussion, make sure you actually implement this and submit this assignment. There are lots of really great ways to follow up with people, make sure they get those right nudges and stay on track. And at a higher level, just see how is the organization doing in terms of progressing towards being better at coaching and creating that whole organization-wide coaching culture. So just as a little bit of a reminder, really thinking about sort of the content, making sure you get that soft skills content, whether it's on listening, whether it's on feedback, being able to discuss that with other people, being able to apply that directly, and then having the insights needed at the organization level to make sure that the impact or desire is actually being achieved. So to wrap up this presentation as a whole, sort of what are some of the key points here? One, really making sure you define what the key coaching traits that you want to implement in your organization, thinking through those. As Wendy described, there are lots of different components of being a good coach, and each one of those is a real skill that can take years and decades to actually perfect. But thinking through, hey, what of these can we really focus on? How can we build these out? Then making sure you get the executive buy-in, really showing the importance of that. I think especially during a time like now, during a pandemic, where some of these coaching criteria are even more important due to the challenges that Zoom causes in terms of interpersonal skills and other things. And then the final thing is, once you have that plan, once you have the executive buy-in, think how are you going to be able to effectively scale out these new skills, upskill all of your employees to create a better coaching culture within your organization. And with that, I think I will now turn it over to Lori for any other questions that have come in.
Yeah, I will entertain questions, but I just want to make sure, can you go to the final slide?
Yes,
the thank you.
Moment.
Yeah, it's great.
Sorry.
Because no, that's completely fine. Let me come back on video too. But so as we're approaching the top of the hour, I am going to be staying on we're all going to be staying on for questions. But for those of you that may need to drop off early, number one, I just want to extend our gratitude for spending the past 50 minutes with us. We really appreciate your interest in this topic, and thank you again for spending the time. And thank you, Wendy, for bringing just a little bit of your 20 plus years of expertise on this topic. I think, like me, the others on this webinar could probably spend a few more hours benefiting from your expertise. But thank you for being here with us today, and thanks for being such a great partner. Andrew, likewise, thanks for playing the role of coachee. That took a bit of courage. And thanks for sharing some of your expertise on learning experience design and using technology to scale training. And just finally, for those of you, in terms of those of you who might be interested in learning more, I just want to share with you what some of your next steps might be. If you're interested in learning more about the Better Manager course on the NovaWeb platform, you can contact us. The contact information is right here in front of you. If you are considering building out your own coaching or leadership development program on a platform like NovaWeb, well, by all means, please contact us as well. There is a product tour coming up in just a couple of weeks on September 10th, in which you can learn more about the NovaWeb platform. You can take in order to do this quickly, you can take your phone camera and just scan this QR code here, and it'll send you to a link to sign up for that. So I just kind of wanted to get those details out of the way for those of you that might need to leave early. But I do want to stay on for a few more questions for those who can stay with us. I thought this one was very interesting, Wendy. There's a question about unconscious bias, and this is a whole separate topic, right? We could have a webinar on unconscious bias, if not a few. But any tips you might give to a coach in trying to raise awareness of their unconscious biases and trying to overcome those in your coaching capacity?
That is a very big question. We're actually developing a whole learning series on unconscious bias, because it is conversations that people can't be afraid to have. They need to lean into those. So there's no quick, easy answer to that. It's really hard. Our bias is invisible to us. We don't think that we have a bias, and we're developing a program so that we can help people look at that, because when you can dig into that, you say, wow, I do make decisions that are biased. So I don't have any, if we have a piece of content in the future, I'll be putting it out on LinkedIn so I can give people some clearer tips, but we don't know what we don't know, which is a problem.
Yeah, that was a biggie. This next question came up following your coaching demo. And this person had asked about whether during a coaching conversation, is it effective to share your own personal experience as a coach?
If you ask permission, that's how I always want to treat it. May I share something that happened to me? If you start talking about yourself, you're really in your own head, which is one of the levels of listening. You're in your own head thinking about I did this or I did that. But sometimes to be able to have a parallel experience, if you say, I once had that too, could I share that with you? Because then it may offer some light on what you're going through now, even though all of our experiences are different.
Great, thanks. And Andrew, I'll direct this one to you, although Wendy may want to chime in. This person wanted to know how you incorporate the coaching practice portion into an online self-paced training format.
Well, I mean, the main purpose of practice is to directly apply it in whatever you're doing. So if your audience for the course is managers, one of the benefits of a self-paced online course is that it can be spread over time. Whereas if you have a one-day workshop, yeah, you may role play it, but there's something different about that. With a course, you can actually say, hey, here are some of the different contents. You can discuss this a little bit. Now go out, practice it with your direct employees, then come back and reflect on how that went. So not everything needs to be in the online platform itself. The real goal here is to get people to use some of these things in real life. And the more that you can support that, the more that you can enable that, the more effective the learning experience as a whole will be.
Thank you. Thanks for all the great questions. They keep coming in. And so I mean, we're not at the top of the hour, so I'll keep taking them. This is a question, it sounds like it is specific to the NovaWed Better Webinar course.
Better Manager.
Better Manager. Hopefully it was a better webinar, but Better Manager. This person's asking how managers are chosen to participate in the coaching curriculum, and is any of it done in a live virtual setting? So I imagine the selection is done by the company, but I'm not sure who's best equipped to take this question.
I can start and say the course itself is a blended experience, if you will, in the sense of it has some stuff that is self-paced or semi-synchronous, where people are doing things by themselves. But we very intentionally have group coaching sessions and even a one-on-one coaching session as part of it. But those sessions hopefully will be even more impactful after having been able to absorb the content, be able to practice and apply the content, and be able to debrief that. In terms of who selected it in an organization, different organizations do it differently, but what I'll do is reinforce Wendy's point, which is every manager could use being a better coach, and it's not specifically targeted for certain types of managers over the other. These are skills all managers need, and you know what? A lot of new managers are never given any background or training onto this, just thrown in because of their success in the job itself, not their success of people management.
I would just add too, Andrew, is when we talked about beta testing, for a company to start and take as big a group as you can, where your budget allows, depending on small or bigger companies, but take a group and say, we want to make an investment in building this culture in our organization and coaching. So raise your hand, because then you get ambassadors, because people that go through that the first time, then you see the difference. You feel the difference of conversations that are happening because they're learning these skills. And then the next group will say, wow, I would really like to be part of this because I can see the difference in my colleagues.
Great, thank you. Okay, I think we'll give people a few minutes to take a breath before their next meeting. And so thank you all for joining us today. Wendy and Andrew, it's been a pleasure working with both of you and preparing for the webinar and hearing it all come together so coherently today and in such a stimulating way. So we really appreciate benefiting from both of your areas of expertise. Everybody have a great Thursday and rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thanks
all.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.